Hey, this is Shane from Genesis Off-Road, and in this video I'm going to give you a detailed look at what it takes to install our dual battery kit into the Jeep JK. Now this one is a 2016 model with the 3.6 liter, so there are a few differences with the older 07 through 11 with the 3.8 liter, so I'll point out those differences as we come to them, but let's get started. Okay, let's just start with an overview of what we're going to be doing here. So we're going to be pulling out the factory plastic tray that holds the battery, the fuse box, and the air box. So this is one big piece that stretches the entire length of the engine compartment. And then we're going to replace that with our steel battery tray that'll drop right in place, and it'll hold the factory fuse box in the same location. So there's several things we have to do to get started here to get things out of the way. First, we're going to pull the stock battery out, and then I'll show you some of the other components that have to move out of the way. So right here we have the evap solenoid. This is the device that controls the evap canister that's located under the back of your Jeep. Since everything is so tight under here, we have to relocate this piece over to a tab on our new steel battery tray. So in the new configuration, this piece is going to rotate right over here and snap down onto the tab on our tray, close to the old dipstick. Now notice this electrical connector right here. On the 2007 through 11 models with the 3.8 liter engine, this wire is not quite long enough to reach over to the new mounting location. So that's why for the 07 through 11 we supply this short extension cable. So this is just a 1 foot extension, the same OEM connectors that you see here. So you'll plug that in, and then just gives you a little bit of extra length to relocate that on the 3.8 liter. So this is not needed on the new 3.6 liter engines. So also notice there's a couple of hoses that come down here and connect to the evap solenoid. You've got a smaller one that goes to the top and a slightly larger one that goes to the bottom of the evap solenoid. We supply new rubber fuel hoses, and I'll show you how to cut these factory plastic hard lines to make everything line up. So let's start by removing the battery. We're going to use a 10 millimeter on our socket here to loosen the post clamp. Now we also have a 10 millimeter down low. Now we can pull the battery out. Okay, next we're going to move the evap solenoid, the fuse box, and the factory air box out of the way. Disconnect the electrical connector, move that out of the way. This just slides off the tab. Now we can remove these little clips just by prying up and pulling out on them like this. There's a little push button on one side of these white clips. Just press that in, push the connector towards the solenoid, then it'll slide right off. Push that one in, and it slides right off. Now on the 3.6 we can go ahead and remove these short sections, and these will be discarded. We won't need these again. Now we need to remove the entire factory air box out of here. To do that, let's loosen up this hose clamp right here. And then to make things easier to work on, we're going to loosen or remove these two 10 millimeter bolts that hold the air intake in place. Now we'll pop the latches on the lid. There's also another breather hose on the back side of the air box. We'll twist the lid to remove that. Save your air filter. Now to remove the lower section of the air box, we're just going to grab it by the sides and gently pry it up. It's kind of snapped in place at the bottom. Take a look at the bottom here. You want to make sure that you keep these three little rubber seals down here that snap onto these tabs. You will reuse those. Notice the factory wiring harness is attached to the plastic battery tray by these little clips in several locations. We're going to use a small pry tool to release these from the battery tray. Just be careful and try not to break the little clips, because you will reuse some of these. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and loosen up several bolts that are holding the battery tray in place. There's another one way down low here on the lower fender, one on the top fender, one over here by the airbox, and one down here close to the power steering reservoir. And these all use a 10mm socket. Hang on to these nuts with the captured washer. You will reuse these. Now this bolt on the bottom of the tray has a nut on the bottom side of it that you will not reuse, so don't worry about that. Now at the front there's a clip holding the power steering hard line in place onto the battery tray. We're just going to pry that out of the way. And then to make it easier to get the battery tray out, we're just going to take this nut off and just move the power steering reservoir right over out of the way a little bit. When you're getting ready to reinstall this, notice this bolt has another large washer underneath it, and it's a little bit shorter than all the rest of them. Now we can get to this bolt. Now you should be able to tell that the battery tray is loose and ready to come out. So the last thing to do is remove the power from the fuse box using a 13mm socket. Now we close up the lid. Now to lift the fuse box, just pry up these little tabs on the corners while you're lifting. Now the fuse box will lift straight up, and you should be able to move it over to the side of the fender. If you look down inside the tray here, you see you got one more little clip holding the wire harness in place. This is the wire for the evap solenoid, so we're just going to move it over here over the fender as well. You've got one more clip that holds the evap hoses to the tray, so we're going to pull that out of the way. And then we should be ready to pull the plastic battery tray out of there. Now we just want to move these wires as much out of the way as possible, and then we'll lift the entire battery tray out of here. So we're just going to groom these wires a little bit and get things out of the way as much as we can. Set that up over here. Just use the dipstick to kind of hold that back out of the way a little bit. Now you see you got a couple of wires that are running across the width of the battery tray. So we're just going to pull it off of the firewall and rotate the tray up out of here. Watch your relays right up here in the corner. Take your time. Get these wires off of here. One at a time, move those out of the way. And it's out. Okay, the hard part is behind us. We've got the factory battery tray out of here. And we're going to set this aside for the moment, but I'll come back in a minute and I'll show you how to remove the airbox support. And here's what you're left with. Great big space, makes it nice and easy for the new tray to drop right down in there. Okay, here's our new steel battery tray that we're going to drop down in place. Lines up right with the 3 holes in the firewall. Here's the tab where your evap solenoid is going to go. These 4 tabs here for snapping the fuse box down in place. And this one goes in a lot easier than the big plastic one came out. So we're just going to drop this right down in here. Move all these wires out of the way. Now, notice we're going to reuse this bolt on the fender, not the original bolt that held the factory tray in place. So we're going to remove this 10mm bolt here too. Now we'll finish getting the tray in position. Let's line up this one on the fender first. We'll put that bolt back in place. I'm not going to tighten that one down just yet. I'm just going to leave that loose while we get the other bolts in place. Now on the 07 through 11 JKs, there's another large power connector, another large bundle of wires that runs across the battery tray. On the 3.6 liter, that one is not here. But for the 3.8 liter guys, that wire needs to go under the bottom of the new steel tray. So it will sit approximately right on top of the shock tower mount. So just make sure that you get that one routed under the tray here. Now we can do the firewall washers. Again, we'll just leave these loose for the moment. Now for the bolt that goes down low in the tray, if you look right down in here, you've got a room to put your fingers through here and get that bolt started. And here's all the bolts that we removed earlier. We're going to use the longest one for that lower fender mount area. Get that down in there. Okay, we'll finish that off with a 10mm ratchet. Okay, at this point we're ready to start tightening the bolts down. And last we'll do the fender bolt. Okay, since space is so tight under here, we don't want these threads sticking out here and poking into the side of our battery. So we're going to use some sort of a cutoff tool. You can use an air cutoff wheel or a hacksaw or a Dremel. But we want to cut this almost flush with the nut after we've put the nut on there, and that way we won't damage our batteries. Don't forget your safety glasses. Okay, now we can start kind of grooming the wires and getting everything laid out nice and neat and organized. We'll start from this side and kind of get things where they need to go. Notice you've got this large electrical connector here that was snapped on the side of the tray. We're going to flip this around this direction, and that's going to snap onto the two holes here on the side of our tray with these little Christmas tree clippies. Alright, that holds that in place. Now, it's easy to get these wires kind of tangled up, so we'll back some of this stuff out. There's our wire for the fuse box. There's our negative lead. Evap connections kind of go right over here. We're going to tuck these two wires. These are going to kind of go down below the fuse box. And we've got our evap solenoid wire. We'll also run this under the fuse box. We'll just lay that right up over here. We'll get to that in a minute. Now we should be set. Everything is all groomed out nice and neat. So we'll just take the fuse box, rotate it right in place, and set it right down onto our tabs. Make sure none of your wires are pinched. Everything looks real good. Make sure your evap wire tucked up underneath there out of the way so when you put your batteries in the tray you don't squish it. Okay, here's a shot of how your fuse box should look now. Notice all the wires are out of the way. Nothing's in the way of the battery, so when you sit your batteries down in the tray, you're not gonna smash any wires. Now we need to get the air box back in place. Let's take the factory tray over to the workbench and I'll show you how to cut off that support for the air box. Okay, now we're gonna cut the air box support off of the factory battery tray, but don't worry, it's actually very easy. We're just gonna keep this section here where the air box snaps right down in place. So all we gotta do is follow the rib line, the molded rib line in the plastic. Make sure you keep this mounting hole and these three connection points for the air box, and between this bolt and the one over here by the power steering reservoir, that's plenty of support to hold this in place. So I like to use an air cutoff saw, but you can use a hacksaw or even a Dremel, but this makes real quick work out of it. Okay, and that's it. So now you can get a little bit better shot here. You can see the rib line that I followed. Just make sure you keep these connection points and your 2 bolt holes will be just enough to hold that airbox in place. Okay, now we can get the airbox mount put back in place and secure it with the factory bolts. Now let's put our power steering reservoir back in place. Put the little clip down low back on there. And remember, this spot right here is the shorter bolt. Now we can set our airbox back in place. Gently press that down until it snaps. That's it. Now we're going to reinstall our air filter. Make sure you get it going the right direction. And the top lid. And just be sure to secure the vent hose. Secure the little clips on the airbox. Now don't forget the 2 bolts right up here on top. And secure your clamp. Now let's reconnect the power to our fuse box. I'm going to pull this lid off the fuse box and set it out of the way for a second. Grab your lead wire. You may need to move these hoses for the evap solenoid out of the way a little bit so you can move this in place. Make sure that's all out of the way. Put our 13mm nut on there. We'll put our lid back on. Okay, now we're ready to reinstall the evap solenoid. On the 3.6 liter engine, you want to just remove this little plastic bracket that holds the hoses in place. You can use a small Phillips head screwdriver to release these latches and pry those clamps up. Okay, and you can just discard this piece. We don't need that. So here you can see the original hose is lined up in this position, and the lower one was going down this way. Now this one I can probably get reconnected onto my tab here. So for the 12 and up, this one lines up pretty well. But this one down here, when you have to rotate it up like this, it'll put a kink in this first bend down here. So we're going to go ahead and cut this one. So go ahead and lower your evap solenoid down in here and move this one out of the way a little bit. And go ahead and set it down on the tab. Now you can see your lower hose down here. Now if you look closely down in here, you can see how this lower hose will line up with the factory hose that's coming from this direction, and the new hose is coming from this direction. So we're going to kind of see where they overlap, and we want to leave about a 1-inch overlap for the new rubber hose to go up over the old plastic line. Okay, so now that I see kind of where that's at, right about here, I'm going to take this back out and set it back out of my way. So right about here is the area where I want to cut this hard plastic line. Okay, I've got these special cutters here that are used for cutting plastic hose. So I'm going to raise this up, push my braided sleeve back out of the way, and just make sure you get a nice clean straight cut on this hose. Okay, let's see how that looks. That's pretty good, not too much deforming there. Now we can lower our solenoid back in place. Put it on the tab. We're going to bring this lower hose up. And we're just going to push it up onto that hard plastic line as far as it'll go. Should go on there about 1 inch. And then you can cover it back up with that braided sleeve. Just kind of rotate that around, push it on there as far as it'll go. And it'll hold on there nice and snug. So So it looks like I've got about 1 inch of it slid up on there. Now I'll just kind of push this braided sleeve back up over the rubber line a little bit, just to kind of dress that out, make that look nice. There we go. No kinks down below, so that looks real good. Now, like I said, on the 12 and up, you can get away without having to do this one. So I'm going to pull this one off. But on the 3.8 liter, you will need to do the same thing with the upper hose. So we're just going to reattach this point right here. Just make sure you don't get any kinks when you lower that back down in place. We're up against the air box, but no kinks, so it looks good. And don't forget your electrical connector. And I've still got a couple little burrs on these threads from where I cut that. So grab the 3 little caps that comes in the hardware baggie. I'm going to put those over those threads just to protect your battery from getting scratched up. All right, we're going to drop our cranking battery in first. Make sure your positive lines up with the factory positive connection. Make sure you leave your caps on here. Now I'm using some North Star batteries here, but any Group 34 battery will fit our tray. Any brand that you prefer, just make sure you get the Group 34 size. So the battery by the firewall, which gets the factory positive post clamp, is your cranking battery, because this is one that connects to your alternator and your starter. Then we'll go ahead and set the accessory battery down in here. Okay, here's our top lid, just the way it comes out of the box. We're going to sit this down on top of the batteries. We're going to go ahead and put our bolts through here to secure the lid in place, and then we'll hook up our wires. And we'll use a 3/16 Allen wrench to tighten those bolts down. You don't have to get real tight with this. We're going to go in a crisscross pattern so the lid tightens down evenly on both sides. Make sure they're all evenly tightened. Now you'll notice with the North Star or with the Odyssey batteries, you'll end up with a little bit of a gap between the tray and the lid. That's okay. That gap is there to allow a little bit of room for the Optima yellow tops, which are slightly shorter. So this gap is okay. Okay, now we're ready to start making all of our battery connections. Let's pull this cap off the negative post. We'll put the factory negative on here. And this wire that feeds over to your ground bus bar, you can loosen this up to get it moved in position. I like to put this wire on the bottom. Move your post clamp around a little bit to get everything lined up just right. And then put that one on top and secure that. Make sure you go to the nut on the back side of this one. This nut right here is actually used for tightening your post clamp only, so that's really not where you want to secure these wires. Okay, now that we have that tight and our wires are lined up real good, now we can go ahead and tighten up the post clamp. Now we'll put that on the cranking battery's negative post. You want to kind of rotate this around a little bit so that you can get a wrench right in here at this angle. First I want to tap that one all the way to the bottom. And this is a 1/2 inch nut. Now we'll do our positive over here. And you just want to kind of push this wire back up inside the lid to get that to line up perfectly and tighten that one on. And then the last one I like to do is the factory positive over here. You may have to kind of push these wires back up behind the engine a little bit to get these to line up. These wires are pretty stiff. Shove that down in there. And we'll bend it up this way. Now when we're tightening up this nut to tighten the post clamp, just be really careful when you're working under here with a wrench. You do have a negative post right here close by that's tied to the battery negative, so it's easy to short this out. So just be real careful in here. Now the last wire to hook up is this lead wire feeding this side of the isolator. We're going to go to this nut on the factory post clamp right over here. Just double check over everything, make sure all your wiring looks good, nothing is interfering or getting kinked. Make sure all these hoses look good. Double check your hose clamp on your evap solenoid, make sure you tighten that down. And that's it, you're done. So that's it. You're all done with the installation. Let me give you a couple quick tips on using your system. When you're ready to hook up some electrical accessories like your lights or your CB or a winch, you want to run all of your aftermarket accessories to your power and ground bus bars on the top lid here. Okay, that way when the batteries are fully charged up, the isolator will have them connected together, giving you the combined power of both of the batteries together. But this system is designed to prioritize protecting your cranking battery from being drained by your aftermarket accessories. Okay, so that means once your cranking battery drops down to 12.7 volts, the smart isolator separates the batteries to protect that cranking battery from getting drained. But you'll continue running all of your accessories that you have wired up to our bus bars here off of your second battery. So you can drain this one down as low as you want. You don't care if it goes completely dead, that's fine. You still got power in this one to start the engine. So then when you do start the engine back up, the alternator will charge your cranking battery first. It'll wait till it sees it at 13.2 volts for 2 minutes. Then the isolator will automatically connect them back together, and that allows your alternator to charge up the second battery. Thanks for watching our video. I hope you found this helpful. But if you have any questions during the installation process, don't hesitate to give me a call. I'll be glad to help you out. Our number is 901-214-JEEP or 5337. Or you can email us info@genesisoffroad.com. We'd be glad to help you out there. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Let me know it was helpful. And thanks a lot for watching.